So hello, I'm Dan Birmingham. We're starting the CDA State Data Strategy webinar presentation. This was originally done at the C4A Conference on May 10th, and we'll start it off with comments from Mark Beckley.
Great. Thank you so much, Dan, and good afternoon, everybody. My name is Mark Beckley, and I'm the Chief Deputy Director for the department. Today, we'll be talking about CDA's enterprise data strategy and vision going forward. We currently collect and store data locally and at the state level in several different ways. And we do it through our local client relationship management systems, or what we call our CRMs, as well as any other local systems you might use. At the state level, we store our data through a variety of different systems as well. For the federal data that you report to us, we store it in a system called CARS. We also store data for other programs that we oversee, such as MSSP, CVAS, HICAP, and Ombudsman, through multiple different systems that have names such as Peach, Sharp, Odin, and Capri. What we plan to do in our data strategy is to create an enterprise data system and holistic data repository that will hold all of our program data. So we'll do that centrally in a single data repository and hopefully eventually in one single system as well. Creating a single data repository and system that stores all data on older adults, persons with disabilities, and family caregivers will provide us with a truly comprehensive and holistic overview of the populations that we serve and how we all age across a variety of different domains. What we hope then is that the data can then be tapped to identify different service needs, gaps, best and promising practices, and really open up additional data exchanges with our partners and providers, both at the state level and at the local levels. And truth be told, there's really exciting work that's happening today to build towards a central data system. You may have heard about our CHARM system, which is our effort to put all of our local AAA CRM or client relationship management systems, as well as CDA's data collection system, onto one single enterprise client relationship management system. Our Division for Policy, Research, and Equity is also continuing to build out our NPA data dashboard, which collects data related to older adults, persons with disabilities, and caregivers in a number of different areas, such as employment, transportation, housing. So this is data that CDA has not historically collected, but we're really starting to collect, refine, and use to further advance the goals and objectives of the master plan for aging. We've also started discussions on the creation of a customer web portal. So what we really envision is a single central portal that will contain information about different services and supports that the people we serve can tap into to find out about services and programs in their local areas. And as we go down this path of creating a single statewide data system and repository, we will definitely be engaging all of you to help us determine the type of data we should be collecting, how the new systems should be configured and constructed, and how we should govern our data going forward. So that's a brief overview of what we'll be discussing today. Our panel consists of a number of experts on data, and I'd like to introduce them to you now. Let's see, next slide, please. Great. So Wilson Tam is our Bureau Chief over our Department's Aging and Disability Resource Connection, or ADRC Bureau. Wilson has been providing strong leadership over that bureau for the past 7 years to help further refine the structure of our ADRCs and to lead the statewide expansion of the ADRC system. Dan Birmingham, who opened the meeting, is our manager over our department's Older American Act data reporting. Dan and his colleague, Missy Tauscher, are responsible for federal data collection and reporting and assisting all of our AAAs with your data questions and needs. Vinod Bhaskaran is the department's enterprise architect. Vinod is responsible for creating the vision and strategy for the new enterprise systems that we plan to use and ensure that they're adaptable and interoperable with other systems outside of our department. Andrea Hoffman is CDA's Chief Information Officer. Andrea has been with CDA for the past 8 months, and she previously served as the Department of Child Support Services Assistant CIO, and previously worked at the department's at the state's Department of Technology. And then finally, Jerry Sammy is the department's Chief Data Officer. And Jerry will be responsible for developing the data strategy for the department, including developing data standards, definitions, governance, collection, and data storage. And with that, I'd like to hand it off to our first speaker, Dan Birmingham.
Thank you, Mark. So these are some of the session topics that we will be speaking about today. First, we're going to start with going to data paradise, and then a little bit more about the data strategy, today's data challenges, some of the challenges that we might be looking at today in real time in our lives today. Conceptual data, foundation, and approach. So those are the sorts of concepts and approach that we are using for this project, this program. The data roadmap. So how are we going to get there? And then some talking about unlocking the power of our data. And then the CDA guiding principles, the principles to guide us during this. And then we'll end with some AAA and ILC key takeaways and some closing remarks as well. So going on to data paradise. Close your eyes. Imagine the perfect data solution. What do you see? If you'd like to, please feel free to enter that into the chat while we're speaking. But what are some things you see when you think about what a data paradise, a perfect data place would be? Some of the things that we thought of that we think that you might relate to as well are streamlined reporting, so one place for everything. Access to real-time data, so clear analytics, things like that. The self-service, so being able to customize it to your needs and the needs of your consumers. Again, getting that data when you want it, when you need it. Being able to share data with partners, so having that capability to do things like cross-sectional data comparison and data comparison and analysis, improving that data quality. The next one is measuring outcomes and tracking performance. So these are the sorts of things to help us to understand the needs of the people and community being served and using that data to take action. And another one being the improving customer service. So fewer forms to fill out. Fewer forms to fill out. And, you know, customers, people, clients, participants, people being able to have their own data, own their own data, take ownership of it, be able to take it from one place to the other, wherever they might be, to take it with them. So those are some things we think about as we're kind of thinking of this perfect data paradise, data solution. So going to the data challenges, these are some things that we think about for the data challenges that we all might be encountering. So we recognize there's many data challenges. We thank all of you for providing feedback so far about what your challenges are. Please continue to do that as we go through this process together throughout the life of this project. We recognize that first of all, there are many fragmented federal, state, local systems, multiple data reporting processes, technologies, systems, bench information, being, all this information being collected. Ultimately, it does affect the people that we serve and the local service providers. So there's really a lot of fragmenting, compartmentalized, siloed sorts of things. And what we did is we categorized those data challenges into these 4 groups. So these 4 areas, first one being people, repeating consumer information, so people having to repeat the same information over and over again, sometimes the same organization. Varied staff competency, so the competency of being able, understanding processing technology, data, information that can vary from one staff to another or one organization to another, depending on training and those sorts of things. The next group being here is the process. So having duplicate data, data collection, pain points from having to report that data into multiple systems, insufficient policy and standards, which is something that is needed to, having sufficient policy and standards are needed to further ensure that data is reliable and consistent. The next area being technology. So having multiple data reporting systems or multiple platforms, again, those siloed or compartmentalized, fragmented data systems that don't interact or talk with one another, and sometimes all within the same department or agency or organization. That can be challenging. Also, that lack of data infrastructure, which could be due to things such as funding constraints, understanding what options are available, and also with the staff competency who are working with the technology, again, with whatever training or things that are available to them for the technology area. And the last area being information. And some points we had here for these challenges in the information area are having this lack of this holistic view of the data. So we're unable to make sense of all the data points for understanding, really fully understanding the people that we are serving and how we can better serve them by seeing everything holistically. If we see things in a compartment or one section and this here, there, we really aren't seeing the whole person. And it's important to do that to be able to better serve, better understand, and better serve those people. Different data definitions, again, could be different funding requirements, different data systems and things like that. So that can be challenging to have that work with one another if there's different data definitions for the same type of data. Data quality can be a challenge as well, which would also impact our ability to effectively use data to drive decisions. And then lastly, the limited data analytics, so impacting the ability to effectively use data to drive decisions. And this is all built upon what you see there for building the CDA data program. These are the challenges we're thinking of as we're building this program for CDA, which was the first time that we've done this for CDA. It's very exciting. And then the last thing I'm going to speak about before I pass it on to my colleagues are the CDA Data Strategy. So this is what we're thinking to be able to achieve that paradise, or as close as we can get to that. And this is the strategy that we're thinking about to get there. So we envision the state data repository to be the central part of this data strategy. It's the foundation, it's the center part that then helps or connects to the things such as the consumer-facing things and the data capabilities and those types of things that Mark talked about in the opening comments. And so being able to do that, so the consumer-facing, again, having the call center, common information, web portal, those sorts of things, different ways for people to share their stories without necessarily having to repeat their information, their stories or their data over and over again. And then that all connects to data capability. So really see this as connected around state data repository. It's not one or the other. It's really all connected together, the state data repository that we're thinking of. And under the data capabilities, we have CHARM. This is a project that many of you may be familiar with. And this is a project we've been doing to enable CDA, AAAs, ILCs, potentially other CDOs, community-based organizations, share a common customer relationship management or a CRM system, which is where our CHARM acronym or name comes from. And again, this has helped to address some of those challenges that we already talked about. So being able to access real-time data, share data, streamline reports, self-service, measuring outcomes, improving customer service, and all those sorts of things. So very exciting where we're going with this. And like I said, my colleagues will now talk more about some of the other things that we're working on this data strategy.
Okay, thank you, Dan. That was a good warm up. So now we're getting into the fun stuff. So CDA currently doesn't have a robust infrastructure to support all that dreamy stuff that we want from that ideal data solution. So we have to build it, and we want to build it smart. And we want to engage all of you in that process using what we call organizational change management. I want to first clarify, there was a question about charm and where does that fit into this picture. So previously, there has been a lot of talk about CHARM, which is the customer relationship management system that CDA is still looking towards and still doing some planning towards. But as we were building that plan, we realized, hey, we need to stop and relook at this approach, because data is really at the core of what we're trying to do. And we want to be able to support data, not for the just the CHARM solution, but also for, like Mark was mentioning, the web portal, eventually potential call center functionality, learning management system, any other additional system or tools or data exchange, if you will, with other public and private entities. So how do we take that challenge and turn it into a foundational concept so that we can build out the infrastructure to support all those capabilities that we want to have, not only for CDA, but for our local providers and our aging network and the services we provide to the state of California. So at the core of this is the CDA data repository. So that's been mentioned a couple times. And what we really want to do with that is have a single source of the truth. So we aren't repeating information in multiple places, that we have a single source of truth information that means the same thing, whether you're in the previous, one of the previous diagrams, whether you're coming in through the web portal or whether you're in the learning management system or whether you're in CHARM, we're not having to repeat information across the different tools and services we're providing. That's the ideal. Again, there's many challenges to get there, but that's what we're trying to conceptualize. If you don't dream it, you'll never build it. So that's what we're doing here, is having that central data repository, but there's a lot that goes around that. Just like the foundation of a house, there is a lot that goes into building the house, but you need that solid foundation. If you build a house for 3 bedrooms, but then decide you want 5 bedrooms, like, yeah, that would be nice, wouldn't it? 5-bedroom house. But anyway, again, dreaming big. We have to design for that, and then we have to plan for it, and then we have to build it. So it's a lot easier to build the 5-bedroom house into our plans versus trying to figure that out later and then rework the plan. So that's what we're trying to do, is build smart, build our infrastructure to support the people, process, and technology and information challenges that Dan discussed. But that repository needs a lot of support. It's going to rely on data, AAAs and other stakeholder groups that are going to be sharing data into our data repository. There's a lot that has to drill down in terms of planning for that, but at the concept level, that's what we're desiring to do to approach this data repository. And then on the output of the data repository, we want it set up so that we can share. This is where the CHARM intersection happens, where we can share the data from our repository to the CHARM project, but also share that same data to our web portal, and share that same data and have it in a format that is interoperable with other systems, other reporting needs, other tools. So on the right-hand side, you can put tools there, you can put other systems there. We really want to design for that interoperability and flexibility for not only the nearer term needs, but also to have this infrastructure be resilient for a longer time period to sustain the changes in the future. Additionally to this data repository, you see a little shield. It's really small, but we want to make sure there's a lot of state requirements around security. It's highly rigorous in terms of the compliance we have to fulfill at the state level. So security, information security, data protection is always top of mind for everything we do. So we just want to call that out, that that is a big factor, and we will always take that into consideration, besides of all the compliance work that we need to do at the state level to ensure data is compliant and protected. And that means PHI, HIPAA, or any other kind of personal identifiable information. And from this data repository, to make it work, we really have to develop a data sharing framework. Some of us have heard of the data exchange framework at the California Health and Human Services level. That is not a technology. It is a framework for being able to share data in a way that means the same thing across different entities. So we definitely want to look at that as we build ours. And the reason why I have to say we build ours is because we have our own unique needs for providing older adult and persons with disability and services related to those areas in the state of California. But we want to look at what the agency is doing and build that into our framework. So down the road, we would be best prepared should we be exchanging data at that level. So we are taking that into account as well. And this data sharing framework also will allow us to set up a common language, if you will, a common framework to be able to exchange data with external partners, whoever we define that to be. So that is kind of the structural components. The two very key supporting more on the process and people side is organizational change management and enterprise data governance. And what do we mean by organizational change management? It really is a methodology, a deliberate focus on making sure the people side of change is embraced throughout this process of building out the strategy. Have we engaged the stakeholders, making sure the communications and outreach is there, making sure we're engaging the right people at the right time to be a part of this process, providing the right training, understanding the process today. So the organizational change management, we're formalizing it here because we recognize we do at the state level need to do a better job at that. And we are putting plans into place with that lens and with that focus to support this data strategy. Along similar lines is the enterprise data governance. So enterprise data governance, you can imagine having all these different players involved with this strategy, this foundation. How do we all work on the same page? So data governance would be a structure for a body of folks to be determined and how that's going to be structured and built out. But the concept behind it is a body that can help us make data decisions. So we can make decisions about duplicate data. We can make decisions holistically about what data we're collecting, what data is a priority for the repository, what data workflow and what data processes we need to have clean and pristine data. So there's a lot involved when it comes to even standing up the data governance so that we all have the same understanding of data, we're speaking the same language, and we're working on the same kind of process associated to data to really give this data repository the integrity we want it to have. Again, to go back to building out those capabilities that Dan talked about and to help mitigate some of those data challenges that we see today. So in a nutshell, that is what this slide represents. So CHARM, just to reiterate, CHARM is not going away. We're just shuffling the deck, if you will, on where we're putting our emphasis so that when we get to the solution part, which is the CHARM, this is more of the data infrastructure piece of it, that we would be ready to go, and that will make that part of actually the CHARM solution go a lot smoother and not have issues or as many issues related to data. We should be well along our way to support that. All right, Dan, can you go to the next slide? Yeah, so we are really at that pivotal point where we can build our direction forward based on building a house, say, around the bathroom and then designing the house around that, or we can design the foundation and build the house more on the left. Since we are a growing program at the state level and we have major initiatives associated with the MPA, the strategic plan and the goals and objectives that we want to achieve as an aging network, we really, really want to design our program to support not only CDA, but for all of you. So we ask for your participation in your support as we endeavor on this, and we'll always be available to answer questions and guide along the way. So we're striving for the house on the left. We want to avoid the house on the right, and we think that this proposed strategy will help us get there. So I'm going to hand it over to Vinod to talk about the major components of the house we're trying to build. And there you go. Vinod.
Thank you, Andrea. As Andrea mentioned before, the importance of data repository and OCM Foundation. So that's where we are seeing it here. So this is our conceptual approach overall, so how we are going to build CHAM solutions, because everyone is looking the CHAM solution. I could see from the chat as well. So, but our approach is actually the conceptual approach is a bit smarter. So we will be building the data repository as you might have seen the previous data repository, the central part of it. But this is an approach, so how we are going to approach this kind of building this solution. So this is what we are working on right now. So in the green side, that is our foundation. So everything works on the data repository, and that is where we are working on right now. And we also seeing that an OCM foundation is as important as data repository, because there may be a lot of changes coming in our way, and so OCM is going to help us to communicate with the people and process and all. So that is the major portion of our approach. So we have to work on the data repository and make it intact. That actually makes all your application built top of those foundation will be intact, like a house, as we saw in the previous slide. So we can also see that there is a data exchange hub. So that is very important, that so data is not sitting in one place. And so this data exchange hub is actually, that is where we actually communicate that with the external partners, including all the stakeholders, other departments under CHHS. So that is where the data exchange hub comes in. And so we make sure that data exchange and data repository is very strong. And so that's where we build our CHAM solution. And so you can also see that there are other system, as Mark mentioned, like a call center, web portal. Those are all applications that we are going to build top of it. But it's ultimately it goes and fetch the data from CDA Data Repository. So that's the way we are looking this approach. And so on the top of that, actually, you can see all other system, not only CHAM, but any other system coming into our into CDA, including LMS. And so that will fetch the data from data repository. That much importance it has, the data repository. So it has to be a source of truth, a single source of truth. Should not be duplicated. All those governance part will be there. So in the next slide, actually, I will go through the roadmap, how we are going to do this one. So into our roadmap, and that what is our plan. But for this one, so we also look at you can see the right hand side, there is a approval process we are adhered to follow with the State Department. So that is going on right now for all our work. And so this is basically a continual progress from bottom to top. So that's what we are looking things right now. And so, Dan, can you, yeah. So this is our data map going forward. And so this is very high level approach. We put it out there, but it's very, it is you can see that so there is a discover. This is actually read from left to right. So you can see it actually starts with the discover phase, and so that's where we identify all our source data out there, including all the AAA's, ILC, internal data, all those system data we need to identify. And we also look at that so what's our data needs, and what is our data gaps out there, and how the data is being used, and is there anything we are missing. All those information will be discovered in the first phase. So then we will go to the actual detail, a plan and design. That is a very a very challenging process, planning, design in that section. So that's where so as we mentioned, the data governance we are going to start with. We will be planning for so where do we host this data in? So I mean the platform details, how we are going to exchange data with the external partners, and how we are going to prepare this data. For example, so we have all the source data, and we need to have a target data structure. We probably need to do all the mapping to source to target mapping. All those exercises will be happening in the plan and design side. So this is where you get lot of information that so what we are going to do, and how we are going to put the data in a platform, where it's going to be, all those things. But in our execute phase, actually, that's where we execute all our plan. So this I mean by implementing data repository, we are going to build mostly in a cloud system. We are going to build that repository, and we also look at other systems, including the reporting system. We also have we also need to identify a training opportunities out there, technical assistance. There are a lot of things actually there. Not only this is a very high level for items in here, including CHAM applications. That's where so we are looking. But that's where we are going to progress from discover to execute. And you can also see that so there is a stakeholder engagement throughout our journey from discover to execute. That is the very important part of our roadmap, because it's all depends on your support and collaboration with this project. And so anything on the stakeholder engagement is highly required for this discover, plan, and design, execute phases. I think I'm going to pass it over to Jerry, for the details of other part. Thank you.
Thanks, Vinod. This is really exciting, and I'm sure you all share the same amount of excitement that we all are feeling at this as we start this journey. I will touch upon a couple of things. And again, we are unlocking the power of our data, and it is enormous. And it is being found and being built, based on many things that you already discovered, right? So the discovery process, as you are entering the, like a new home or something, it is so exciting to see the rooms. It is so exciting to see how the kitchen is modeled, how the backyard is and how the front yard is, what kind of, smart, features are there in the house. So all those are very, very similar to our data program in terms of many of the items that you see. So again, all these topics are pretty big topics. We could probably speak for many days, many weeks together, but we will just touch upon at a very high level what we are unlocking. Number one, on data governance, what we are unlocking is what data we have. And I think that's really key. And Mark and all the other speakers have touched upon this. Do we have only the supportive services data? Do we have only the nutrition data? Or do we have a combination of that? Do we have caregiver data? So we are in this journey unlocking in terms of what data we have. So that's number one. Number two in the data governance is who is going to govern, right? So that's going to be all of us. And predominantly, we will be serving two roles. One of the roles would be data stewards, right? To a very, very large degree, our external stakeholders, like our AAAs and ILCs, would be, forming the data steward kind of a role, right? We have so much data, we know so much about the data, and so we would be the perfect, in the role of data steward. The other side is data custodian, right? Meaning that we make sure that the container is tight. We know about the data really well. And we have a platform, which is like a house here, which is highly protected, but has, all kind of facilities for everyone. So that's kind of the dimension towards the second part of data governance. And the third part of dimension of the governance is how are we going to govern? So this is where the data program and its all functions coming into play, right? In terms of repository, in terms of data management, in terms of data quality, and how are we going to model the whole architecture, right? Making sure from the left to the right, as the data coming in from AAAs, we are going to get the supportive data, supportive services data. We are going to get the nutrition data. We are going to get the caregiver data, all not in aggregate. It is going to be the detailed data, right? So we are literally going to open and unlock the power of data in this program. We are going to see the quality of data. Also, we are going to see the quantity of data. So governing them, determining what is good and what is not good, and what is the primary core, data function that meets your needs is key. So again, that's about data governance and those three dimensions of unlocking that power. The second area that we are going to unlock the power is on data management. Again, data management. So three key points. The first one is related to, optimally using the resources, right? So we are going into the house, right? There is so much information there, so much resources there. Our kitchen is there, our bedrooms are there, family room and everything. So we utilize to the maximum. We utilize in the ideal way and the purpose for which it was built. Obviously, kitchen would be used for all of us in the room, utilizing the same appliances that has been built for everyone. So there is kind of, a facilitation of things. There is underlying structure there. There are some gadgets, right? There are some smart addition to the house, which we are going to untap for, but we need to use optimally. Like we don't want to bring in like 10 gadgets, right? We don't want to bring like 10 data dashboard tools. We don't want to bring like, 3 different databases. So all these are to speak that to how we can do optimally utilizing our resources when we select and go with a data architecture or a data platform that's ideal for all our needs. So that's the second one. Number third, data security, right? Data security, again, as part of data management is key. So again, what we are not talking about is the container security. It's need to be protected. That's not the topic here we are mentioning. What the topic is in terms of understanding the data, making sure that we are HIPAA compliant because our organization is designated as a HIPAA organization. So we need to be compliant in terms of HPI, the protection of our health information, protection of personal information, so on and so forth. So that's kind of classification. That's kind of our categorization that needs to be done. So we need to make sure that we take care of and unlocking, the power of data there. So that's the second dimension. The third dimension in data management is data quality. Again, a couple of us mentioned that it's key, making sure that we set the bar really high, making sure that data is pristine as it comes through the organization and as it lands in the data repository. So as it goes through the whole flow, as we ingest the data from outside to inside CDA, it flows in a way, it gets refined. Again, we don't make that change, but you as a stakeholders, taking care of where the data meets the standard of all that we determine collectively, so that when we take the data ultimately to the data repository, it meets the standards. When we look at a person, whether it's a caregiver or whether it's an aged person or whether it's a provider, it is a person, and there are some characteristics that has to be met, and it has to be passed through the standardization. So that's kind of a quality that we are talking about in the data management. The third one is data and analytics. Again, there is two sides to the coin. One side is data, wherein as the data comes in to CDA, goes through all kind of process we talked about, goes and sits in the data repository. And it's going to serve two main purposes. The first purpose is it's going to be available for CRM system, as an example. So you are going to look at the data in a pristine form in terms of providing services in your day-to-day work. So you have the data that is integrated for quality. It is integrated for, in terms of reference. It is not orphaned. It is not sitting on its own. It is not siloed. It is an integrated data with of high quality that you are going to use for your CRM system. You are going to use for your call center. You are going to use it for your learning management. So this is the two sides to the coin we are talking about. One is data, which I mentioned. The other is the analytics. Again, there is a big potential for analytics in CDA that we are going to unlock. When we unlock this one, you will have self-service capabilities, meaning that the data will have, according to your needs, you can dashboard things that is, not out of the box, build the reports, standard reports. Some of them are standardized, some of them may be custom for your own needs. So analytics and unlocking the insight for data is going to be key, and that's what we are unlocking. So those are all the left-hand side of, three key areas or functions you can think of in the CDA program, data program that we are looking into. So now coming to the right-hand side, right? The first one is organization-wide data view. This is, again, really, really big. The target model or the future model that we are looking at is, for the first time, it's going to unlock the power of an integrated view of data for CDA. That means a person's data or person data set would be looked at as holistically for different kind of our needs. So we are not really defining and putting ourselves in a corner, but we are being very open and flexible in terms of having the data sets ready for various needs of the organization. So that's really big. Number two, organization-wide access at appropriate section of data that will be architected and administered. Again, there is various levels who will see what kind of a data that is being architected as out of the platform that we are looking to unlock. So again, that's on the organization-wide data view. The next one is data literacy. And I think this is one of the biggest unlock of our capabilities in my mind, in our mind. And too often, data literacy covers generic concepts with the exercises that are not able to be related for businesses, everyday problems and processes. So what we are dreaming really big on is the knowledge of the organization, especially in relating to specific data assets. When you are bringing in and when you are sharing that data with CDA, we are going to understand not only in a siloed way, we are going to understand in a common way. Say, for example, as part of a business glossary, we will understand in the same way. When you mention caregiver and when I mean caregiver, we all mean the same thing. And not only that, we will go one step further and say where else that caregiver data is stored. So it's almost like a data catalog. If you go into like Amazon or any of those kind of things that you use, when you put in a keyword, immediately get a list of, like products and services. So in a similar way, the data catalog kind of unlocking the literacy side of data, because we need to understand very, very importantly what data we have, where we have it, and how are we using it. So those are all the important concepts and understanding that we are unlocking as part of data literacy. Last but not the least is a data platform, again, end to end, from the beginning to the end. It will be a secured and a flexible platform. So that is what we are unlocking. The house is being built in such a way that the blueprint of the house is solid, meaning that you have water that is available in where it is supposed to be. There are sewer and other connections are already laid down so that, the house doesn't have to be modified, to lay new kind of a line or anything like that. So all the blueprint of the organization, blueprint of a home, you can think of, or a building, is part of this data platform. We will make sure that those guardrails are built, making sure that our objectives will be met and our outcomes as expected are tapped into. So this is again really, really big, but at the same time very exciting, time for all of us in unlocking the CDA program. I have one more slide, and then with that I will conclude. So as we going through this journey, guiding principles are very, very important, as you can imagine. These 5, we don't have too many and we don't have too less. These are 5 kind of a pillar for our house on which it is going to be built. In terms of compliance, right, we want to make sure that we are complying to the state and federal and other regulations, making sure that confidentiality is maintained throughout the process, from the beginning to the end. So that's number 1. Number 2, data integrity. Again, I touched upon this a little bit in my previous slide. It's key, making sure that the integrity of data, both from accessibility and from reliability, is kept throughout the life cycle of a data. Number 3, partnership to develop data and drive decision. Again, we are not building in a siloed way. In partnership is what we are building, and we have really big dreams. We are shooting for the sun and the stars in terms of how much we can leap to unlock and see the insight of data for CDA. So partnerships is important. We are definitely looking forward to working with all of you. Number 4, growing smart. Like I mentioned, from the 10 years ago, building a data platform to now, it's so much has changed. So we adapted to emerging technologies. We are adapting, and we must adapt ourselves as a guiding principle to, like probably some of the things doesn't have to be done in the same way it was done 10 years ago. So that should be our one of the guiding principle in terms of adapt and then, learn. That could be, maybe a great big plus point for our program. Last but not the least is, in our data focus is definitely an equity is part of it. That data lens is very, very important to advance to our strategic goals. So those are the 5 guiding principles, and that's end of my kind of speech today. So I'm handing over to our fearless leader, Mark. Please take it away, sir.
Yeah, Jerry, thank you so much. That is our CDA data team. Thanks, team, for presenting. So yeah, what I wanted to really go over, and I saw some questions in the chat along these lines. So I think the key questions that you'll have is, what does this mean to you and where do you play into this? And Jerry already went over some of those items in terms of what your role is. What we're really going to be looking for your assistance with, especially over this next year, and by year I mean kind of fiscal year from like July to next June, is to help us with a data assessment. So as we mentioned, we've been working on the CHARM project, and so grateful to our ILC and AAA partners who have worked on a work group for us for about a year to define high and middle-level requirements for the CHARM system. And all of that information is definitely going to be used and baked into our eventual CHARM solution. But we really want to bring all of you along with us on this journey. So, the first step is, identifying data gaps and needs. So as we go and we study and look at all the data that you currently collect, is there data that we should be collecting that we're simply not collecting, or maybe not collecting at the right level of detail? So when we build out CHARM, we want to make sure that there's appropriate fields and that there's the right data sources feeding the CHARM solution, which is really the second bullet there, the data sources. So we know that we all need to collect the OAPS data for federal reporting needs. Beyond the OAPS data, is there additional information sources that we should be feeding into CHARM to really provide that more holistic overview of, older adults, persons with disabilities, caregivers, just all the populations that we serve. So we'll be looking for that from you. And then, how do we really configure this new data repository to be truly usable? So, usually data repositories, they're built out in modules. So we'd likely need a caregiving module, a nutrition module, a legal module. Are there other modules that you think should be included in the system that would be, key domains to identify? The way that those modules are worked just in practice is, when we build out some sort of business intelligence, so query and reporting tools, if you have a module that's fed by multiple data sources, say a caregiving module, you can do quick snapshots, to see how caregiving is going for a given population. And then data governance, basically meeting regularly as a group like AAA's, CDA staff, to just periodically look at the data that we've collected, look for gaps, look for additional needs, because of course data continually evolves, and we need to make sure that we're keeping an eye on the data, that our systems are evolving with our needs. And then participate in decision making for system changes. So once we get to a CHARM solution, once we get to a data repository, likely, like I say, data evolves, our systems should evolve. We'll have to look to see what system changes are needed to reflect changes in our population needs or just our data needs. And then participate in discussions around data definitions. So like Jerry said, it may seem logical, this is what a name is, this is what an address is, this is how I define certain nutrition data elements. But really, in practice, everybody, has their different perspectives on what a data element should be called or how it should be defined. So that would be part of the job, is just to make sure that we're all defining our data in similar ways. So we'd have discussions on that. And then next slide. So this is really, in the meantime, what should we be looking at? So like we said, CHARM, our original plan was to try to implement it in the current year. We really think that to do this right, one, we should set up the central data repository, as Andrea mentioned. And two, we need to bring you along this greater charm journey with us to make sure that we're giving you the solution that you really need. So in the meantime, please continue data sharing. So you may be sharing data locally. We definitely encourage that. Continue your existing CRM contracts. If you need help with questions about data sharing, we now have this wonderful data team that you can tap into to assist with those kind of arrangements, or maybe, federal or state requirements around privacy protection and security. So we'd be happy to help with that. Outreach and guidance. So as we say, protecting local data, helping you to design local data sharing agreements, and any sort of local data preparations or planning you may be doing, we're willing to and able to help. And then in terms of development, again, working along with us on the CHARM project, working with us to build out this new sort of data governance strategy, and we'll likely consult with C4A to talk about forming a work group around this, and then building towards a data platform. And people, I'm sure many of you will say, okay, we know CHARM's being delayed for how long. We don't have a definitive timeline yet. I'll just put it out there, likely it's going to take us 3 years. And the reason why I say that is we need to get to the central data repository first. And then there's this whole wonderful project approval lifecycle process that the state has that does take time to work through. We also have to get a better understanding of what your IT assistance and funding needs are going to be. So if we get a statewide system, how much in ongoing licensing costs can you currently pay for, and what might you need additional assistance to pay for? And then in terms of data migration, what assistance would you need and how much would that cost? So just a lot of questions that we'll have. But like I say, the first step in this process is really data assessment, which we'll be conducting over this next state fiscal year. And then as we go along, we'll provide you with more detailed timelines in terms of what it will take for us to eventually get to CHARM. And that is the conclusion of our presentation. I think we're going to open it up for a bit to Q&A, right, Dan?